Welcome to the Fallen to Grace podcast. Welcome, everyone. Hey, thank you so much for joining us on our brand new podcast, Fallen to Grace, where we talk about the grace of Christ in everyday life. If we've never met before, my name is Lindsay, and this is Taylor. And we both live in different parts of the northwest corner of the United States.
Our heart behind this podcast is to place and connect and discuss the Bible and flesh out Christian living in a space where grace is the forefront. So consider this a space that everyone is welcome, whether you've been following Christ recently or you're a lifelong member or aren't even a Christian at all. This is your place to start.
So we thought we'd use this first episode to share a little bit about our stories and the purpose behind this podcast, since this is kind of our first introduction. So Taylor, how about you start by sharing your story of how you became a Christian?
Well, that's a lot. So I didn't grow up a Christian, like, at all. I mean, my family said, oh, God's real, God loves us, basically just really vague everything. I went to VBS every summer, pretty much up until, I would say, probably like junior high. And I grew up normal. I was a dancer. I played the piano. And then eventually I got into singing. And I had a voice coach that was a music director at a very strict Lutheran church. And that was fine because I just wanted to sing. So I was like, whatever. And I went there and of course I sat every day in the choir and I listened to the sermon and I just sat there and I didn't care. I didn't really believe in God at that time. I was like, no, there's too much pain in the world for all this to be happening, whatever. But I just like singing and I think the music is great. I thought that. And then that definitely followed me all the way. And then into high school, my family was going through the financial crisis like everyone else was in 2008, 2009. And I definitely we got kicked out of our house at one point. And I just was like, how can God let his children suffer like this? And how does he care when there's people that are suffering? I mean, even much worse than we were every day. And I went through this depression because I didn't know, I just didn't know. I felt lonely every day. I didn't know anything. I kind of had, I had friends, but they were, I would say, superficial. And so it just was. And then my family moved we were living in Arizona and we moved up to Washington, and I met a boyfriend that was not a good thing, and I was living with him, and then him and I had this really bad situation. Maybe I'll talk about it another time, but it just opened my eyes that I was like, this is not it. Whatever I'm doing is not it. And it was kind of a slow process after that. Me and Lindsay had been friends for a little while, and I always thought she was great. But I was like, I don't know. I think a lot of young people at the time, I think I was 22. And so I just was like, what's something different? And I started listening to Lindsay talk about, her life through church. I even went to a women's group that she had. And I was like, now this is something that I think I could really get behind. And I started dating my now husband. And of course, we talked about we got married, and then started talking about having a family. And I just wanted something that was family values, and the family was the center of everything. And then definitely, so I was thinking about it, and then definitely after I got pregnant with my son, I really definitely, I feel like everything just kind of kept building in one little stone. And so then after my son was born, I definitely just dove right in. Lindsay and I started a Bible study together, even though we don't live in the same state. We did it over FaceTime, and I've been growing ever since. And it really, I think it hit me that I wanted other young millennial and then Gen Z girls and women to understand, hey, if you're a part of the hookup culture, the new age, whatever, unfortunately, I fell into a lot of the hookup culture stuff, and it was bad. Like I said, I knew this wasn't it. And I want other girls to understand, you don't have to do that. You don't have to be a part of that. That's not, first of all, it's not right. And second, there is something else out there for you. And that was probably the biggest thing for me to see, that there is a life outside of what the norm is for early 20s and even teens. So here I am sitting here, and I want to share that with everybody.
Man, that's amazing. And I think it's interesting how you talk about, when you were younger, you knew about God, but you didn't understand the suffering piece, and you didn't understand why life was like, could still be hard, like even if you believed in God. And I think that's where a lot of people get really stuck, because they don't,
Totally.
but then, like you said, then you look to the world for answers, or you look to like hookup culture or whatever. And it just sounds like it's kind of empty,
Yeah, you kind of like go off searching for answers that you never find until like then you find that you are rooted in Christ, and that that's the life that you should be living,
Yeah. Well, and it's, I'm curious to hear too. Cause it's not like you waved a magic wand when you became a believer and everything was like perfect. So I'm curious as to kind of how, like, what your perspective is on, difficulty now, and I'm sure like some things like you were talking about, there's some things that we kind of dig ourselves into, like we go searching to something else other than God. I know I have a million times, and it always ends up like at a dead end.
Exactly. Because in the end, there's only one truth, and that's God's truth. Yes. So you can search far and wide, and you're never going to find it until you realize that it's not about you, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that like has been true about you since I've known you, is that you always want the truth.
Girl, thanks.
Yeah. Well, and it's true. And I think that's something really profound in today's world, that, like we don't, if you don't just want answers, if you're looking for an answer, you'll find a million answers. And we've talked about this a lot before, but you'll find plenty of answers, but like you say, like
exactly,
it may not be the truth, but.
And I guess it can kind of use to piggyback into your story. You kind of find the wrong answers.
Yes. Yes, that's true.
So you want to tell us about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's cool about Taylor and I's experience is that we've kind of had our detours, but from different starting points. Because I grew up in a Christian family, and like my grandparents were Christian, my parents were Christian, my grandparents' parents were Christian. So it was like not being a Christian was not necessarily the norm in my family. And I'm grateful for that, because I was always aware of God growing up, and not just aware of that there was a God, but that he was personal, and that he wanted to be part of our lives, and that salvation was a thing. It was just like part of who we were. And I remember even when I was a kid, like I would talk to God, and I just had the sense that he heard me and that he was there. And so I accepted Christ like when I was 7. I just remember sitting in my room, and I just had like this intense feeling, like this intense burden that I needed to give my life to Christ. And it was, I couldn't really explain it at the time. I just knew that, like, I just went to my mom and I was like, what do I do? And so she just kind of walked me through a prayer, and I got baptized, within a couple years. And then I started getting more involved at church, also a VBS kid.
Best play.
Right. And graduated to junior high group and the high school group. And regardless, I still really liked, I felt kind of awkward in kind of youth group and stuff, but I had some good and bad experiences, but I loved being at the main church with my parents, because they were talking about the Bible and how to read the Bible, which at the time I didn't realize was such a gift, because they really taught me how to just like, that pastor really just taught straight from the Bible. He wasn't like going to,
yes,
which like we've talked about, is like not
that's
necessarily
huge.
a common thing. Yeah.
No, absolutely.
It's a big deal. And so the church I grew up in was really heavy on that kind of expository teaching. And I really appreciated it. Really loved worship as a kid, because like, I'm a very emotional person. So worship, I felt like I could really connect with God. And then when I was 14, my dad just became sick and died. Like, it was totally out of left field. He was diagnosed with cancer one day, like, he was acting funny, and then he was diagnosed with brain cancer a few days later from when he started not being able to really function. And then 3 months to the day he had passed away. And it completely devastated me. Like, I all but
Definitely.
lost. Yeah, it was, I mean, I don't really know how to explain it to people who haven't been through that, but it was like
Totally.
all but losing your total identity because, and I didn't want to feel my dad's death. I just wanted to be okay again. And so
Yeah.
I ran from grief and instead of dealing with it. And I just like did everything I could to distract myself. So I went on, I mean, thankfully, like my mom was awesome. I mean, she just kind of helped me do things that helped me feel better. Like I went on mission
Right.
trips and I tried to be as normal as I could. And yet in all my not feeling and, you know, in there was like being mad at God, you know, like you talked about, like, how could this happen, you know?
Yeah.
And so in all my trying not to feel all that, like my feelings turned into a depression. And so I was depressed, like just more and more depressed through high school and college. And I went to a Christian school and I majored in Spanish. I love Spanish. And then I filled up, you know, I was kind of advanced in my degree already. So I had a lot of these extra credits to use. And so I just filled it up with theology classes.
Mm-hmm.
And so thanks to some professors, like, I mean, it really opened up my eyes to new ways to actually like read the Bible. And the text really came alive to me and it was like a breath of fresh air, like from my depression. And at the same time, I started learning about the Holy Spirit and churches that were really like what we call charismatic, or like they talk about speaking in tongues and healing and really feeling God. And like in my
Mm-hmm.
depression, that's all I wanted to do was to feel God, you know?
Right.
And and in that desperation, like I did start like experimenting with different churches, and I ended up meeting, you know, I ended up going to a church that was pretty cool, but I ended up meeting this person, like this friend there just one night. And then she invited me to hang out with her. And it was just like it was a very messed up situation because I ended up going to her church and moving in with her at kind of like really like it was kind of at the expense of my current friendships at the end of college. And so after college, I went to live with her and attended her church. And it turned out being like a really, I mean, however you want to classify it, I'd say it's a cult. Some people might say it's just a toxic church, but it didn't help that I was living with her and that she was like my new mentor. And it was like a very
Yeah.
unwise decision. Like I did not know the first thing about her, but you know, she claimed to experience God, like, and basically be a prophet, you know,
Yeah.
and that's all I wanted. You know, it's like my judgment was completely clouded because I wasn't dealing with my own depression or grief or whatever. And the thing is, like, when I tried to talk to, you know, my professors when I was getting into this charismatic stuff, and vice versa, when I was talking to the charismatic churches about what I was learning in college, they both said each side was completely wrong and bad. So I was like, I don't know, like, which one to go to, because like apparently I have to pick. And so I went with the one that I felt like I could experience God in. And so anyway, what that resulted in is I just completely shelved every bit of logic that I had learned about, you know, reading the Bible from both my professors and my old church. And then like, got into some weird stuff, you know, you know, it was, I just started believing, you know, lies about the Bible. And I believed that, you know, you had to earn your salvation. And I believed that because I wasn't praying in tongues, that I wasn't saved, and
Yeah.
all this toxic stuff. And, you know, I was taught that I needed to cut off like ties or like back away from my family, back away from my Christian friends because they weren't Christian enough. And so like so it just like kind of snowballed to the point where I was like, you know, I just felt awful all the time. I was in fear every single day. I just was basically torn down, you know, like
Right.
I was told that I was bad, I was evil, and, you know, I was dealing with demons. I was told that I was demon possessed. You know, I went to go get an exorcism. Like it was crazy.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Like, and then, and
Like
I was
something out of a movie.
right. Yeah, it was nuts. And so like, but it was like, I couldn't, like the situation was so difficult that I didn't think that I could get out. So, like, I was just living under constant anxiety. And I truly believed that God like didn't want me. And yet, like, as hard as that season was, like, I really just tried to get to know God better. And I did experience God in some crazy ways. And then one day, almost 3 years to the day, it just like, he got me out. And I don't like, I mean, it was just crazy how like boom, 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 all of a sudden I was out. And then thanks to some like mentors that I had met through our work, you know, like some Christian mentors. And thanks to, you know, Jason, you know, my husband, like we had started dating like, probably a month or two after I got out of that situation. And I just moved to a barn and, you know, we had conversations with him really helped me undo all of that religious shame and stuff that I had, you know, like swallowed in like those 3 years. So it was wild. So
yeah, totally.
But now I'm really passionate about helping people recognize like, you know, deceptive teaching and kind of how to navigate through it. So
yeah. So like, would you kind of say then, cause I think at some point in our lives, everybody hits like a crazy, like, I don't know if I want to say rock bottom per se, but you know, just like a traumatic event of some kind that in some ways, like it makes you vulnerable to toxic teaching like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I see that in both of our stories. Like it's almost like the rock bottom is like the worst, but at the same time, it's a catalyst to truth, you know,
but at the same time, it's like the best.
Yes.
Like,
exactly.
I mean, you can't go anywhere but up after that, but it does lead you to, you know, like, obviously, I mean, gosh, the fact that Jason and then I'm sure, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It brought you back, and that's great. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, like, you know, God was already working in those ways and he brought you back. And I think, and that's kind of like part of the purpose of this is to also help everyone out there to figure out what's false teaching and what's real.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think it's really cool that, you know, it is these moments where we could like, I mean, kind of like what your idea for the name of this podcast, you know, it's like we could fall from grace or we could fall to grace, you know?
No, absolutely. So why do our stories matter? We're just two examples of how grace has come into our lives, and we want to show that grace is possible no matter where you are in your journey. You can be a lifelong member of the church like Lindsay, or you can be just starting out like I am. But the fact is that you're seeing Christ and you're seeing him now. You can start off with a fresh slate.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the thing is, like, when we do fall in life, you know, like we just said, we don't have to fall away from grace. Like, I mean, we could use these opportunities, these low points that we have to fall into grace. And the scriptures are really clear that, I mean, there's no perfect life, you know, I mean, everyone has this journey, and it's usually like in our weakest points where we find Christ. And, you know, that's kind of like where we got the idea for this podcast. I think Taylor brought it up maybe a year ago. I don't know. It's been a long time in the making.
It all blends together.
But we both wanted to offer something to the Christian community, particularly women, you know, who want to belong somewhere, because we know that there's a lot of amazing Christian communities, but sometimes, like, you know, I shared in my story, there's not always like that safety there, you know, of being able to discuss like, is this legitimate or is it not? Or
totally. Yeah. Because I mean, you can go to your women's Bible study and be like, it sounds right. So, you know, and sometimes it is like nice to have like another opinion. I guess another opinion.
Yeah.
And another place, like a forum where we can all talk about this, something different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think not just offering like, okay, what's right and what's wrong, but like, like how can we go about finding what the Bible says about it?
Definitely.
Yeah. So whether you're a new Christian, whether you've been a Christian forever, or even if you're just kind of dipping your toes into Christianity to just kind of feel out the waters, we want to welcome you here. We invite you to stick around and connect with us. So speaking of which, there are a few ways you can be involved. Isn't there, Taylor?
Yes, sign up for our email list. When you grab our Fallen to Grace Bible Study Guide, you'll be automatically included in our weekly newsletter where we can share more about what we're talking about here, along with encouragement and inspiration to keep you.
Yes, and you can also send us a question or feedback on the podcast. You'll find on our website that there's a place to submit questions, and we might feature it here as a whole episode or as part of an episode. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on any of the episodes we've posted. So just feel free to contact us there as well.
And follow us on Instagram. That's where we're hanging out during the week, so we'd love to chat with you there.
Yes. Absolutely. So anyway, reach out. This is a community, so we can't have a community without you. So please don't be shy. So today, as we wrap up this episode, we just want to leave you with this verse from John 14:27. It says, and this is back when Christ was encouraging his disciples right before he was about to go to the cross to die. And he said, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. So let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. So thanks again for joining us. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift his countenance upon you and most of all, give you peace. See you in the next episode. Bye for now.